And it really worries me, Toby, whether or not all of these young guys, because you've seen a rise in mental health issues, you've got a high rate of suicides among young men. Are they being demonised unfairly in your mind?
I think they are, yes. I've got 3 sons and, I quite often hear about courses they've had to do at their school. I mean, they haven't actually had to do a course called Toxic Masculinity or How to Tackle Toxic Masculinity, though I believe some teenage boys are having to do courses like that. But nevertheless, you get the impression that the people teaching these courses don't have a very high estimation of what it is to be a man. They think it's essentially a malignant condition, a bit like having cancer, and they're teaching young boys how to overcome the disadvantages of being born essentially evil. They're considered kind of sinners who have to be absolved of their sin and taught how to behave better. I mean, it's little wonder that they're turning to people like Andrew Tate when the only official sources are telling them that being a man is something you should be ashamed of.
Is it, Emma, being a man, something to be ashamed of?
No, absolutely not. Look, I'm a feminist and I make no bones about the fact that I centre my campaigning on women and women's rights. But I'm also a straight woman, so it is absolutely in my interest for men to be happy and emotionally intelligent and well-adjusted. I'm also an aunt. I have a wonderful nephew, and he's a proper lad. He likes his football. He's 18, so he goes out and gets drunk with his mates. But he's also emotionally intelligent, and that's the balance. And I think we really, really have to separate the toxicity from the masculinity, because if we just denigrate masculinity as a whole, that's a real problem, because there's wonderful things about masculinity. I'm looking across the studio. I see you've got a book by Grayson Perry there. I think he's fascinating on the broad band, the broad width that can be within masculinity, and so much of it, I'm attracted to, I'm interested in. Most of my close friends actually are men. And I think that there's a real danger that we just pigeonhole toxic with masculinity, which is a very narrow way of addressing what being a man is, from that much broader, much more interesting range, and really celebrating all that boys can and should be.
Do you think there's a challenge, Toby? Because previously, you had quite specific gender roles. So the woman would be stay at home, you raise the kids, you do the cooking, cleaning, whatever. The man was the breadwinner, the provider, the strong guy, and he protected his family. What you've had now is a massive erosion of that to try and create some form of equality. Do you think that's a good thing or not?
Well, I think it can be a good thing, but I think it depends on how it's presented, how it's taught, whether people feel under pressure to be something they're not. I mean, one of the confusing things, I think, if you are a young boy, is that when what were traditionally masculine qualities, being driven, being a go-getter, being competitive, trying to achieve something, leave a legacy behind. If women now exhibit those qualities, they're thought to be virtues. Isn't that fantastic? You're escaping your stereotype, you're overcoming thousands of years of patriarchal oppression. But if boys try and do those things, if they try and succeed, if they try and win, if they try and achieve something really memorable, if they want to be famous and celebrated, that's somehow an example of toxic masculinity. They're now expected to behave like women were forced to behave for thousands of years.
Is that fair, what Toby's saying, Emma?
I don't think it's fair. I think there is an element of that in some of the extremes on the debate, but I don't think we should take the extremes on the debate as where we should be or where we really, really are. So I think there's plenty of celebration of male success, but there can be ways of celebrating male success that aren't simply about pouring into this, as I say, very narrow view of what male success looks like. So cheerleading for men who want to stay at home with their children, as well as cheerleading men who run great and well-run professional workplaces, as well as cheerleading the England football team, for example. All of these things are examples of men doing what they want to do really well. And those things, I think, absolutely should be championed. It's when we narrow it into that vision that Andrew Tate of I'm only successful because I've got 12 idiot cars and and I can hang out with women I've essentially paid for and may well not be treating well. We'll see how that court case comes out.
But you made
That's not good masculinity, and it doesn't have to be the definition. It really shouldn't be the definition of good masculinity.
But you made it quite narrow, though. A second ago, you said something along the lines of, my nephew, he's a proper boy, he's into football.
I said he's a lad. I think there's a difference between, he's your classic lad. And there's nothing wrong with that. I love my nephew. He's a great lad. But, to be fair, my niece is a very, very girly girl, but she also loves football. So, and that's the thing, we're blurring the lines about what you can like and what you can do. Great. But let's not do that in a way that denigrates masculinity or femininity.
I think you're a bit more moderate and sensible than many of the people teaching courses about toxic masculinity in schools to teenage boys. I mean, Celia Walden, in her piece about this in The Telegraph, she says that her friend's 13-year-old son, after the horrific murder of Sarah Everard, was taken into an assembly with every boy in the school and essentially told that they needed to respect women, as though any of them could at any moment become Wayne Couzens. And there is this kind of this sort of moral panic that we're somehow in the midst of an epidemic of violence against women and girls, and unless we retrain men, they could all turn into Wayne Couzens. It's like it's generalising from a few bad apples. You wouldn't tolerate that for a second if there was if it was done about, black people or brown people. Similarly, for it to be done about men is really offensive as a man.
I mean, I think there's a difference between saying and having a sense that boys should respect women. That should be standalone. It should be a special assembly. It should be a general sense that we all have. Women should respect men. Men should respect women. Human beings should respect each other. I do think when you say an epidemic, we are talking about a culture at the moment where 2 women are killed by partners a week. So that feels quite epidemic to me. So I think we do need to understand that there is a culture that needs addressing, where men who are feeling inadequate in some way are taking that out in violent ways upon the women in their lives. Not all men, we absolutely know that, and I've said this many, many times. And it's about finding the balance between celebrating masculinity, expanding the boundaries of what masculinity can and should mean, and recognising equality between the sexes, but also celebrating the difference between the sexes.
Tell me very quickly, what is masculinity, Toby?
I think it's being self-reliant. It's being your own person. It's standing up for yourself. I think it's also caring for and protecting those you love. I think it's being responsible. I think it's not wasting your life, not allowing yourself to be too easily distracted by easy pleasures, but to do something which takes self-discipline and that's really worthwhile and that takes a bit of commitment and hard work.
See, I find that fascinating, the latter bit that you just said, because I would just describe that as being driven, not masculine or feminine, but just being driven and focused to achieve. And then you would define that as masculine, but on the flip side, I'm being a massive hypocrite because I will often say to my friends, etc., sometimes I feel like a bit more of a boy in some respects. Don't worry, I'm not about to start declaring that I'm called Dave and ask you to call me he and him and all the rest of it. But sometimes I do think I've got quite a lot of traits that are more character-wise associated with men. I'm quite... there's a word I want to use that I can't use at tea time, but I'm trying to think of an opposite word to what I want to say.
You're full of testosterone.
Yeah, I think I've got a bit of testosterone. I think I'm very driven and all the rest of it. And I do think that is often associated with masculinity. Let me throw that open to you at home. What is masculinity? Before we even start going on about what's toxic masculinity, I'll start with that question to you. You can have a think about it and let me know your thoughts. What is masculinity?